people who play RPGs. These are a bunch of nerdy losers who will fork out their hard-earned money for any game in the genre. Well, at least that's what EA seem to think anyway. The nerds in the cave would always show up for an RPG because it was an RPG. That little nugget of condescension didn't come from a meme page or a bitter ex-employee's ramblings on a forum. It came from David Gader, one of the creative leads behind Dragon Age The Veilguard. He was quoting the mindset of EA executives when describing their approach to BioWare's long-term loyal audience. In a recent PC Gamer interview, Gader lifted the veil on how BioWare's upper management, under EA's watchful eye, viewed its most devoted players, not as a passionate community to be nurtured, but as dependable, basement-dwelling automatons. The nerds in the cave, they called them. Players who would buy anything stamped with the letters RPG, regardless of quality. But here is the infuriating part. This isn't just a grim anecdote about one studio's decline. It's a window into a broader trend. The creeping corporate belief that artistic legacy can be boiled down to brand recognition, and that dedicated fans can be served reheated slop because, well, they'll eat anything. So, with that said, join me today as we look at how that mindset gutted one of gaming's most beloved studios, nearly killed a genre, and why, despite everything, those same nerds in the cave might just have the last laugh. I am Lady Decade. If you like spicy gaming content, then hit that subscribe button, as it's time to talk about how EA seems to genuinely think that you are stupid. When Dragon Age The Veilguard was first revealed, you could practically hear the collective eye roll echo across the internet. Once a revered franchise known for gritty politics, meaningful choices, and world-class writing, the series has now seemingly been reduced to sanitised corporate slop. The characters looked like they'd wandered in from a cancelled Netflix reboot of Shadowhunters, and the tone, much less dark fantasy and much more Gen Z saves the realm with the power of inclusion. Fans who had waited nearly a decade for a follow-up to Inquisition were left wondering if BioWare had been secretly taken over by the world's most corporately friendly TikTok influencers. And the backlash wasn't subtle. Social media timelines turned into bonfires of snark and memes, with even loyal Dragon Age fans quietly weeping into their grey warden cloaks. It felt like the final flaming arrow piercing the heart of a once legendary RPG studio, but while that release felt like a passionless sludge, fortunately, in the darkness, there has been some light. Speaking of RPGs born in the light that feature actual passion and artistry, Claire Obscure Expedition 33 might just be the best example we've seen in years. I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if it ends up scooping that coveted Game of the Year award. It's imaginative, visually stunning, and unapologetically true to its genre, and right now is 43% off via my link in the description and pinned comments. So, if you haven't played it yet, this is your sign. But if, like me, you've already wrung every drop of brilliance out of this amazing, great game, don't worry. There are thousands of AAA, indie, retro, and modern classics available with up to 90% off through the very same link. So go on, treat yourself, support my channel, and enjoy not paying the insulting prices the likes of EA and Ubisoft seem to want us to pay for their digital slurry. Good games and good prices. It's a win-win. So happy shopping, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. Once upon a time, before shareholders and quarterly earnings gutted them, BioWare were the undisputed royalty of the Western RPG. Founded in 1995 by 3 Canadian doctors, literal doctors, BioWare carved out a name with games that were ambitious, narratively rich, and unashamedly nerdy. These were people who thought branching dialogue trees and tactical combat were more exciting than explosions, and thank goodness for that. The studio's reputation was built on classics like Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, games that didn't just tell stories but invited you to live inside them. Mass Effect provided us with branching moral choices that had actual consequences. Dragon Age Origins gave us politics, betrayal, and dwarves with the moral complexity of Shakespearean characters, and unlike today's rinse and repeat content loops, these games respected your time, your brain, and your imagination. So, what happened? Well, in 2007, Electronic Arts bought BioWare in a deal worth up to $775 million. On paper, it looks like a match made in heaven. EA wanted to invest in rich storytelling and RPGs, and BioWare needed the funding and support to keep scaling up its ambitious projects. Back then, EA made all the right noises about creative independence, mutual respect, and supporting BioWare's unique vision. Ray Mazika and Greg Zeschuk, the original founders, sounded optimistic. Even the press seemed cautiously hopeful. But if there's one thing we've learned from watching the games industry for the last 2 decades, it's this. When a big publisher says creative independence, they usually mean until the next financial report. This meant that it wasn't long before EA's culture of corporate micromanagement began to infiltrate the organisation. BioWare's iterative, handcrafted development ethos, so crucial to its early success, started to bend under pressure. Deadlines tightened, systems were streamlined, appeal to everyone became the unspoken mantra, and with it came a creeping sense that the heart was slowly being removed from BioWare's games. Sure, it didn't happen all at once. Mass Effect 2, for example, still had some magic, even if it leaned into more action, and Dragon Age 2 less so, but the trajectory was clear. The studio that had once defined the gold standard of RPG storytelling was now being slowly retooled into something more palatable for the algorithm. So, let's talk about their latest and now rather infamous quote. According to David Gader, one of BioWare's former lead writers and the mind behind Dragon Age's complex lore, the top brass at EA had a rather enlightening nickname for BioWare's core audience: the nerds in the cave. According to them, there was a belief among the EA higher-ups that these were the fans who would supposedly turn up no matter what just because the word RPG was printed on the box. They didn't need quality, depth, or innovation, just the genre label, and they'd be happy. If that sounds patronising, that's because it bloody well is. This wasn't just off-the-cuff developer chat. This reflected EA's internal culture, a belief that BioWare's fans were brand-loyal suckers, reliable revenue streams, rather than discerning players. In Gader's own words, management believed they'll buy anything we give to them, so we don't really have to try that hard to keep them satisfied. The implications of this are pretty stark. Rather than nurturing the studio's hard-won reputation for quality, EA began shifting focus towards attracting new players, those who wouldn't be frightened off by lore-heavy dialogue trees or companion affinity systems. It seems that instead of appealing to players who would actually buy their games, they were more interested in trying to appeal to the modern audience. So out went some of the complexity, and in came looking for so-called broad appeal. So-called marketability overtook narrative cohesion. Authenticity was quietly sidelined, and this wasn't just theory, it was a visible shift in tone. Gader recounted moments where internal feedback began demanding that BioWare's games become more approachable. This meant removing perceived barriers to entry, diluting systems, and simplifying mechanics. Not necessarily out of malice, but because someone in a boardroom assumed that the cave-dwelling nerds wouldn't mind. I mean, these people will continue to buy anything. And the real tragedy, in the past, with this sort of attitude, that approach worked. At least temporarily. Despite declining quality with BioWare's games, fans continued to buy them. Some fans stuck around out of loyalty. Others tried to defend the changes, but over time, the disconnect grew. The phrase nerds in the cave wasn't just dismissive. it was EA showing its hand. They weren't building games for communities, they were mining the communities for predictable behaviour. If any of this is sounding absurdly familiar or cartoonishly cynical even, that's because it is. The mindset described by David Gator isn't far removed from the villains in Wayne's World. You remember the type, slick, suit-wearing media execs who smile through their teeth as they suck the soul out of everything that made something special. In the film, these execs didn't care about authenticity, they don't care about the audience. They care about packaging products for mass consumption and slapping a brand on it, and they do it with this smug certainty that the original fans, the nerds in the cave if you will show up regardless. I mean, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? And much like Wayne and Garth, getting told to tone it down, trim the weirdness and sell out to sponsors, BioWare's developers were being asked to water down what made their games brilliant: complexity, grit, narrative risk, in favour of mass market compatibility. And just like in Wayne's World, the people calling the shots didn't actually understand the thing they were trying to commodify. They just knew it had a loyal following and figured they could monetize that loyalty without doing any of the hard work. Of course, in Wayne's World, the underdogs eventually win. Authenticity triumphs. The soulless exec gets his comeuppance. But in the games industry, well, don't worry, we'll get there. Looking back at the last few years, it seems that the nerds in the cave mentality didn't just influence how BioWare talked about its fans. It seeped into the games themselves. With EA at the helm, BioWare's design priorities began to shift. The old studio culture, which prized slow burn narratives, complex party dynamics and player-driven consequences, began to give way to buzzwords like accessibility, market expansion and broad appeal. What once made BioWare games feel handcrafted now had to survive within the confines of executive metrics and mass market viability. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the story of Dragon Age The Veilguard. Formerly known as Dreadwolf, the game had reportedly undergone multiple reboots, at least one of which included a full-on live service model, complete with multiplayer features and monetization hooks. The problem? Literally nobody asked for that. The live service ambitions were eventually scrapped after internal pushback and, more importantly, after EA's previous disaster, Anthem, proved that not even BioWare's name could save a game designed backwards from monetization metrics. So, Veilguard quietly pivoted back to being a more traditional single-player RPG, but not before years of wasted development time, internal reshuffles, and mounting fan cynicism. The constant change in direction speaks volumes about the internal conflict. Developers still wanted to tell meaningful stories, but they were doing so under the watchful eyes of executives who believed metrics mattered more than meaning. And this isn't conjecture. Gator noted how difficult it became to pitch character-driven content, as leadership couldn't see the value in those elements unless they directly translated into sales. There was a tension, an increasingly irreconcilable one, between the soul of BioWare and the demands of its parent company. Dragon Age The Veilguard is seen by many as a complete disaster, and the long-term fallout of EA's meddling didn't take long to show. For fans, the steady erosion of BioWare's identity led to a wave of disillusionment. Once a name that guaranteed quality, BioWare now carries asterisks. Dragon Age 2 felt rushed, Mass Effect Andromeda was a technical farce, and Anthem, well, the less said, the better. Each stumble chipped away at the goodwill that had taken a decade to build, and as the games faltered, so did the people who once made them great. Many of BioWare's most influential voices, including co-founders Ray Mazuka and Greg Zeschuk, quietly departed. Gator left. Casey Hudson came back and then left again. What remained was a brand without a clear identity and a studio struggling to figure out whether it was a story house or a content farm. But BioWare was not alone. Disgustingly, across the industry, we've seen similar patterns. Once niche genres get vacuum sealed into blandness for the sake of metrics, passion projects get repurposed as IPs, creators become middle managers in their own studios. RPGs in particular have suffered, not just in quality but in soul. The genre that once meant depth, choice and complexity now too often means cooldowns, colour-coded loot and cinematic cutscenes interrupted by corridor combat. Even Japanese studios have fallen prey. Final Fantasy XVI is a case in point. Flashy, expensive and technically competent, but unmistakably westernized, down to its faux Game of Thrones setting and real-time action borrowed straight from a Sony blockbuster. It doesn't feel like a Japanese RPG. It feels like a Western publisher's idea of what a Japanese RPG should be if you wanted to succeed globally. In other words, inoffensive, cinematic and entirely forgettable. But here's the good news. Every now and then a game comes along that proves the Wayne's World villains wrong. That proves you can make something visually stunning, mechanically deep and unapologetically artistic and still have it sell. Something like Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This is a game that doesn't pander. It doesn't tick focus group boxes. It throws you into a surreal world of storybook horror, turn-based battles, and painterly visuals that look nothing like anything else on the market, and yet it's everywhere right now. It's the kind of title that execs said would never work in today's market. Too niche, too slow, too weird. Which is why it's so satisfying to see them proven wrong, with it continuing to sell like hotcakes. God, I love that game. So, what can we glean from all of this? Well, EA clearly underestimated their audience, gutted one of the most beloved RPG studios of all time, and thought that plastering the letters RPG on any old content would be enough to keep the fans happy. But the thing is, those so-called nerds in the cave, they weren't brain-dead consumers. They were paying attention. They noticed the dumbing down. They noticed the shallow systems and empty choices. They noticed when character writing gave way to checkbox marketing and when handcrafted worlds were replaced by engagement-driven ecosystems, and eventually they stopped showing up. That's the real twist here. Not only did BioWare lose its magic, but it also lost its trust. And once that's gone, you can't buy it back with prettier hair shaders or jazzier UI. The cave dwellers emerged, blinking in the light while it's closed. And they've been championing better games ever since. Games like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, games made by people who still believe in weird ideas, rich worlds and treating players like they have more than two brain cells to rub together. The kind of game EA execs would sneer at over a lukewarm soya latte right before it outsold their 4-quadrant genre fusion cinematic experience by sheer force of actual quality. So no, EA, we're not your pawns, we're not your marks, and we're certainly not buying your reskinned live service disasters just because you think RPG is still a magic word. We might be nerds in a cave, but we've got tastes now. We've got standards, and most importantly, we've got receipts. Don't forget that Clair Obscur Expedition 33 might just be the best example we've seen in years of a genuinely brilliant RPG crafted with passion, respect and artistry, and if you haven't already, you owe yourself to play it. So get 43% off via my link in the description and pinned comment. But if you are a man of culture who has already had fun with that, you can use the same link to treat yourself to up to 90% off of thousands of other games. Or if you want to support my work personally, access my cosplay library and more over on Patreon. And I'll see you all again in the next episode.